All right, everybody, welcome back to the Good Grain Podcast. I'm here with Mike.
What's up?
Today, we're going to be answering some of your questions. So first, thank you to everybody who did submit a question. If you're not familiar with how to do that, every now and then we do some polls on our Instagram, and we'd love for you just to submit some things that you'd love for us to chat about, and we kind of go from there. So let's go with question number one.
Yeah, what we got?
So I'll kind of boil this one down, but the question was essentially, how do you shoot in low light and be able to process your image so that it's not too grainy?
The $1 million question.
Yeah, so this one's a little bit loaded because they're, and all of these kind of are, which I don't think is a bad thing. But so let's talk about low light shooting in general, right? Some of the reasons that you would want to do it are either because you want to shoot like, some stars or some light painting or a sunset, that sort of thing. You can run into some trouble there.
But also like at a wedding, you've got reception, you've got, end of the night dancing, the whole deal. It's usually just, kind of string lights, very low light scenario.
So I'll kind of divide it into two spectrums. So you have the spectrum of intentional low light shooting and unintentional.
Yeah.
For me, unintentional would be more in the wedding category or events, or you're at a spot and you don't have any other option but to shoot in low light.
Yeah.
And the other would be intentional. So intentional is a little bit easier. So we'll just kind of knock that out of the way, and Mike, feel free to add anything. But for me, if I'm in an intentional spot and I want to shoot an image clean, rule number one is a tripod if you have the option, right? Let's go ahead and take stability out of it so we can eliminate all shake. Yep. And if you have one that can get low to the ground, awesome.
And what are your typical settings? Let's say you are handheld. Let's say you are handheld in a low light scenario. What are your typical settings on your camera?
Let's get to that on the forced side of things, because I think that'll be a little more relevant, because if you can control it and we take the shake out of the way, then from a setting standpoint, ideally treat it, I kind of treat it as if I'm shooting in the daytime. And what I mean by that is I'll go ahead and first I choose my ISO, which is just your light sensitivity, right? I go ahead and take it way down because all ISO is in some form or another directly tied to grain, right? That's also going to be relative to your camera, right? If you're on a GoPro, you might be able to get away with 400 and call it a day before it gets really noisy. If you're on a higher end Sony, you can go to like ISO 1,000,000. I mean, those things are amazing. But that being said, I typically like to stay at 800 or less at nighttime. Then from there, I'm going to dial in my aperture to figure out how much of the frame I need in focus. And then the last thing is going to be the shutter speed. And all I'm trying to do most of the time is start with an even exposure, right? What I mean by that
right in the
is,
middle.
You look on the meter on your camera, go right in the middle and start from there. From there, I'm just rocking my shutter speed back and forth, right? I've got my grain eliminated with a very low ISO for whatever camera you're on. We've got the stability taken out of the way, and we've got the depth of field, so your f-stop handled just based on how deep you want something in focus. And from there, it's pretty easy.
Yeah.
Now back to your point of what settings would you use if you can't control.
Because again, I feel like the majority of the time, at least for me, when I find myself shooting in low light, I do not have a tripod. It was not intentional, and you just got to make the best of it.
Right.
So to circle back, like, I know what my settings are. I want to hear if it's a wedding, it's the reception, we have some string lights up, there's not much going on. What are your go-to settings?
So do I have an on-camera flash or no?
For the first scenario, let's just say no on-camera flash.
Okay, if you don't have an on-camera flash, and I'm not talking about the built-in flash that pops up, I'm talking about a speed light, something that an external light
flash
that you put on the hot shoe, and you can control that, because that also will change things a bit. So, so let's say that all you've got is a body and a lens, and you got to get it done. So the thing that I always hold firm to is no slower than 1/100th of a shutter speed. Now, I break that rule often sometimes, but in an ideal world, 1/100th is almost guaranteed a clean shot. Now, the rule is double your focal length, right? So if I'm shooting on a 70 to 200 at 200, in theory, I should be at 1/400th. However, and
Sure.
if your lens has image stabilization on it, just kind of remove that from the equation for now, because that can cheat things a little bit too.
Yeah.
But let's say a basic lens and body, 1/100th is a great shutter speed to start on. And then from there, you're going to kind of want to open your lens up as high as it can go.
Yeah.
And again, take that with a grain of salt,
Sure.
right? If you're shooting something far away, you got a lot more liberty to open it up than something up close. It just, the deal. It depends on what you need in focus. But ideally, let's say that we have a really common lens. We'll say a 24-70.
2.8.
2.8 throughout. And that's also a big deal if it's a constant aperture or variable. But let's say that it's a 2.8 throughout. I'm going to go 1/100th, 2.8, and then I'm going to start rocking that ISO up until I get the image that I want.
Sure.
Now, that said, you've got grain, right? There's no way around it.
Yeah.
And I would encourage people that grain is not a bad thing. Not always, right?
Yeah.
To a point. Here on the Good Grain podcast, we love grain, right? We named the show after that. And there's something about having a texture to your image that
it gives it another layer.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a texture. It's something it's something tactile to the image that you don't get otherwise. That said,
yes. But
it can ruin an image for sure.
About to say, that being said, it's a double-edged sword. Like, the grain can be good.
It can be.
But can very easily get out of hand and make your image just, unusable.
Right. So now if we do have an on-camera flash, at that point, I'm going to try to stop my ISO on something I know for my camera. And I would say you're just going to have to do some testing. Go outside, shoot at every 100 increment, 1, 2, 400, and go from there, and then look at it on camera and then say, okay, this is acceptable. And then introduce the on-camera flash and say, okay, how much output do I need to bring into my scene to keep my shutter at 1/100th, to keep my ISO at, wherever I want it to be, my aperture there. Then you're just bringing in extra light.
Sure.
So, that still counts as low light, but, we're introducing a light source.
Yeah. And I would say, your lens plays a pretty big factor. And low light, like even 2.8 is great, but I'd say even in that scenario, and in the later evening of the wedding when we're shooting a reception or something like that, I'm probably going to be on a prime that's going to 1.4, 1.8 somewhere in there, and just doing what I can.
And you figure out your style. I mean, if I've got a 1.4, ideally I'm going to actually want to stop it down as far as I can. To get a little bit more, but that may even be like 1.8 or f2.
Yeah.
That's really just to mitigate some errors that every lens kind of brings to the table.
Yeah.
But that aside, you're right.
Yeah. And I would say, whenever we go camping and, it's blue hour, it's starting to get into the, completely just pitch black, headlamps are on.
Right.
When I'm shooting that kind of scenario, my settings are probably 1/100th or 1/60, probably 1.4, and about 1600 ISO.
Right, and that's really safe.
And I'm doing that in camera, and then when I get into post, I may be bringing it up quarter of a stop or more. But in camera, I'm staying close to those settings because I know for what I shoot with 1DX2 or EOS R, that's going to deliver usually a pretty clean image. But again, it's blue hour, it's nighttime. You're not trying to make the whole scene illuminated. I feel like that's a big part of it when you're shooting low light. You obviously, when you're shooting low light, you most of the time you're wanting that low light look. You're not trying to make it look like daytime. It's low light. Like, if we're shooting at blue hour while we're camping and there's headlamps on, like I want to capture that really cool, dusky, very, sundown look. And so again, I don't want it to look bright and airy. I want it to look darker and, just a little more heavy with just that headlamp guiding the whole image.
And I think that's a great point of taking in the final result into the in-camera portion of things. And I will say that, I'm a personal believer of your gear doesn't necessarily matter, but this is one area where better gear really does make a difference. Like in my mind, if you're shooting in daylight, you can get by with a lot and make a fantastic image.
You can go to Target right now.
Right. That is almost indiscernible from others depending on what it is. But in low light, this is where you earn that money back.
Yep.
And obviously it depends on the situation.
Yeah.
But this is one area.
But still, your knowledge goes a long way. Like you can have
Absolutely.
the fastest glass in the world and the best low light camera out there, and you can still have a terrible image.
So let's go back to your point of, when you're shooting camping and obviously you don't want to bring a ton. So you're kind of just going to body and lens and calling it a day. When you bring it back into post, what's kind of your workflow for the second part of the question, which was how do we process it to make it clean? Now, and I'm going to do the caveat of we are specifically talking about using Adobe Lightroom. If you have another similar software, most of the same rules will apply. But if we reference something specific, we're really talking in that software. And I would encourage anybody to spend the $10 a month and get the the Lightroom Photoshop bundle. It's very well worth it.
Yeah. And so, I mean, before we even dive into the processing, what you said earlier is a big point is knowing what you're going to do with it, but while you're shooting it. And for most of the time, all my images are going to social media. Right. So you can get away with a lot, but when I'm shooting a scenario like that, where camping, it's low light, really what I'm shooting for, kind of what we talked about, is a middle of the road as I can get. So I want to try to make sure my shadows aren't crushed. I haven't lost all the information, but I don't want I shot an image. It's one of my favorites ever. The moon is out. So like a very bright, ball in the sky.
Right.
And there's two people with headlamps on, and it's blue. It's past blue hour. Like the sun it's almost pitch black. Right. So all you can really see are the headlamps, the outlines of the people, and the moon, it's obviously a tricky scenario because the moon was very bright, the headlamps were very bright, and the people were very dark. So what I was trying to do was make sure as best as I could in camera that I wasn't losing all the information on the people, because in my mind in post, I can bring up those shadows a little bit,
right?
While as long as I still have my highlights, I can pull those back down. So it's not just a blown out circle in the sky. So while I was shooting it, I was aware that in post, I'm making sure while I'm shooting, I know I can lift later.
Right.
And once I got that image, so again, we're shooting at dusk, blue hour, whatever you want to call it, camping. When I got into post, the first thing I did was I lifted the exposure a little bit, lifted the shadows a little bit to where I got a little bit of detail. There was noise on the people.
And you do really want to reference your histogram whenever you're doing this.
Yes.
That can be a separate conversation. But
100%. Lifted my exposure a little bit, lifted my shadows, and then pulled back my highlights down to keep everything down. But for the most part, I mean, that was the first thing I looked at was, can I lift these shadows at all?
Sure.
And I shot it. I think I remember the settings. I'm pretty sure it was like 1/60th or 1/50th of a second, around 1600 ISO at 1.4.
Right.
And I mean, they turned out good. Again, it's not a completely even exposure, but that's not what I was going for. Like I wanted a silhouette look. I wanted the focus to be the people with the headlamps looking up at the moon. So I wanted the moon to be, not be blown out. I wanted the headlamps not to be blown out, and the shadows on the people were crushed a little bit. So you did lose that information. So this is what you're going for. Again, it's the processing is all about what your end result is and what you're going for.
And I'll say for the folks who care about the little bit more of the technical side of how to process noise out. So you basically have two channels that your noise lives in. And if you don't like the science behind digital stuff, forgive me now, you can fast forward a hair, but you basically have, we'll call it color and light noise, right? So you have your luminance and your chroma noise. So essentially, when you're in noise reduction, you can't just pull down the luminance noise and expect for everything to go away. It's widely regarded that if you split your image into the three main curves, the RGB, right, the red, green, and blue values, most of your noise is going to live in those blues, right? So one really simple thing you can do is just desaturate the blues, right? That's going to pull a lot of the noise out. Obviously, be wary of your image. If you're shooting at blue hour and you're desaturating blues,
you're going to lose a lot of info.
It's going to kind of kill a lot of the vibe.
Sure.
That said, there's some other things you can do to recover, but that is one option, is just to pull some of the saturation out. It doesn't necessarily remove the grain, but it removes the color out of that grain. It removes some of that chrominant, those chroma values. In Lightroom, I think it's just referred to as color noise, but it's a dance between your luminance and your color and those two sliders. That said, all noise reduction does soften your image a little bit, which is a big reason why we really want to shoot at a faster shutter speed when possible, so that when you soften, you're not going off the deep end there.
And I will say, for the most part, and I'll let you get right back to it. I try to not use any kind of noise reduction as much as I can, because it's often so much. And I would say 90% of the low light images I shoot, if I have to add too much noise reduction to it, I just don't even use it, because in my mind's not a usable image. Like that's just as a personal thing. I just don't like it. It's just not something I just try to avoid it. The other thing I do on pretty much every single image, but especially low light images, is go into the sharpness panel. Again, we're talking about Lightroom.
Right.
You can hold on a Mac, you hold the Option key and you click masking, and you can actually select which parts of the images your sharpness is being applied to. And so you can, make it not apply to the grain. Very small, subtle thing, but it does help.
Right. So it obviously doesn't remove the grain itself, but again, we're trying to take your eye off of the grain and have it focus somewhere else. So one thing that you can do very easily is you can burn those shadows. So the concept of dodging and burning is just lightening is dodging, burning is darkening. You can do that with a selective brush, a mask. You take your image into consideration, but you can totally just make some areas a little bit darker. Obviously, that's going to remove some and it's some attention to the noise. It's going to take your eye where you want it to go.
It's all the subtle changes you make that help the image be great. There's not one trick in the bag that's going to just make the image fantastic. So it's all the little things that you can do to help your image along.
Yeah.
And again, like James said a second ago, it really is not. It's not about removing all the grain. It's where people's attention is going. It's just kind of like, sleight of hand. Like you're making people watch one thing while you're doing something else. Like it's not about removing it. It's about drawing attention.
Right. So that's a really great question. I hope we answered that. If there's still some things that you want to discuss, hit us up on our Instagram. Send us another message or shout another question out. We'd love to talk about this further. So great question. Mike, what do you have for the next one?
Yeah. So the next one I have is, can you stand out without presets?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Dun, dun, dun. So here's my take on presets in general. One, I love them.
Oh yeah, big fan.
That said, I do not think that you should bank on them as your end all be all of what you know about what's going on. And what I mean by that is, I think that it is really good for you to know exactly where along all the panels that a preset is affecting your image.
Yeah.
And then still use one. Like they're great. Now, can you stand out without them? Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. You totally can.
Sure.
One of the ways you can stand out, and this may be a little cliche, but the biggest way you can stand out is your lens choice.
Yep.
Right? Yep. We have a friend of ours that I can look at his stuff immediately and know who shot it because he loves to use wide angle stuff.
Yep.
And there's something about his eye and his composition with that specific lens where I'm like, oh, that's so-and-so, 100%. Now his processing does come into that a little, but for the most part, I've seen enough stuff where he's developed a style based off of just a lens choice, and then you throw color on top of that. But to me, that's the biggest way you can really stand out. Is just
I would agree.
Your eye is going to be the thing that people gravitate to at the end of the day. Your color might make them stop over something and make them say, there's something, there's some sauce on this.
Yep.
But your eye and the way that you look at your subject is really going to be the thing that ultimately sells you no matter what. Because some of the presets I started out with, I look at them now, and one, they were trendy.
Yep.
They
100%.
They were, I started using presets in, I guess, 2010, somewhere in that ballpark. And one, there weren't a ton of them around. And so when they first came out, you're like, what? I can click a button and my pictures look like Instagram stuff. And keep that in mind. That's all Instagram started as, was a way to apply some cool presets that to make you do something.
It was to make everybody a photographer. Yeah.
Right. And so, presets are great on that regard, but I don't think you should, put as much stock into them versus investing in knowing how to compose an image.
Now, and I will double up on that and say 100% your lens choice. There are so many other things that truly make photographers stand out than a preset. You can 100% stand out without presets. It is, it's your lens choice, but it's also your aperture choice. I mean, the last few years, it's been the trendy thing is to shoot at very shallow, 1.4, f2,
Right,
even 2.8,
right.
and everything's blurry, everything's bokeh, and
Right.
everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, it's so amazing! Like, how do you make the background blurry?" I mean, you know, Apple, their phones have portrait mode now, make the
Right.
background shallow. So shooting it just even like 3.5, I mean, just shooting a little bit with just a little more depth.
Yeah,
you know,
you'd
just
be
making
really
it
surprised how much that just adds
sure.
to stuff.
I
'Cause
mean,
think,
from a storytelling perspective, 3.5 brings so much more into focus. You know, so if you have your subject in a spot where you want to see a little more of their surroundings to tell a little bit more of a story, 1.8 is not necessarily your friend.
no, you know, there's a reason that they used to call it F8 and B there, and that's because that just allows you
Sure.
to really take it all in. Now, I will say that presets are amazing for efficiency. They're great for workflow. They're great for really helping your work be consistent. So, you know, whether you buy somebody's preset or develop your own style and make your own, you should have some form of a preset, even if it's just, hey, I have this preset to take vignettes off.
Yep.
You know, whatever it is,
100%.
you know, presets are good in that regard.
Yeah.
You know, I use presets really heavily in my wedding work.
Yep.
It helps me stay consistent.
Yeah.
That said, I had also been editing for a long time without them.
Yeah.
So I think it's much more beneficial
Sure.
for you to learn what each panel does. Like, okay, if I raise my exposure, what does this do?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
it changes,
those
you know,
type of
and things, exposure is a perfect example. Exposure changes a lot more than just the brightness, you know, the air quotes, the brightness of your image, you know, like it does so much more. Just untruly, like what you're saying, understanding what everything does.
Well, and I like to think of exposure as, you know, if you ever gone in and, you know, let's say you wanted to paint your room or something, right? You look in the store, it's all super bright and daylight balanced, and you get that paint swatch, and then you stick it in your room that's got one little lamp with a tungsten bulb, and you're like, why is this all yellow and orange?
It looks
you know,
disgusting.
there's something about the light that's present in your scene
100%.
dictates how much those colors reflect back and the saturation
100%.
values of those. And so, you know, again, exposure really is a good example of how to stand out. There's some folks that I've seen lately, and this is a kind of trendy. It's not really a preset, but it is standing out. They just shoot their images a little bit darker.
Yep.
And all that
I'd say
does
that's
is
the
it
thing
just
right
takes
now.
a lot of the color and it kind of naturally saturates and desaturates, right? The colors are still full. They're just not bright.
Sure. Yeah.
So, and that's been really cool for me to see that. I'm like, there's something here that I don't think is a preset.
And I will, you know, and I will, something that bothers me a lot is, you know, and there's a really popular preset manufacturer that does this and they market as this, and it's, you know, it's the one click preset, you know, make your image amazing in one click. And you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I think that's
that's
a great example.
I do not like how they phrase that, because it's not one click, and you're putting a lot of photographers on crutches, you know, when you do stuff like that, because they're not, if people are, you know, they get their camera, they buy that, they, you know, it's like shooting an auto. You may get some amazing results, like it's like better than anything you or I could ever do. And then the next 10 shots are terrible because you don't know what to do. Right. But, you know, they market it as you know, one click, like you put the preset on, or 3 clicks or whatever. And I cannot remember. I mean, I use presets every single day in my workflow, some kind of preset. I cannot tell you the last time I did a quote unquote one click preset.
No.
Every single time I apply a preset, I'm changing. I will say I leave HSL a lot of times. Like I leave that alone, because in my mind, if I don't like the HSL on the preset, I don't like the preset.
Sure. So what Mike's referring to, for anybody who doesn't know, HSL is just an acronym for hue, saturation, and luminance. So what we were talking about with your exposure, how it changes color, that's kind of why we gravitate towards a preset. You know, what is it doing within those color channels where it's, you know, kind of pushing or pulling or saturating, desat, those types of things. So to Mike's point, you know, that to me is really the predominant factor of any preset is how is it affecting these colors. So if you're in the video world, the same thing would apply to a LUT, which is another acronym for a lookup table.
Yep.
You know, these one-click LUTs, like they were designed around a specific body, a specific sensor, a specific, you know, even format that those things were recording in, and at a specific exposure.
Sure.
There's some LUTs where you can't even use if you didn't.
And they could still be.
They're
still an amazing LUT, still an amazing preset. They're not one click. They still could be great, but
Right.
they're not one click.
But that being said, there are so many little subtle things that you can do to stand out
100%.
that,
100%.
presets
Yeah.
will never make you a better photographer. They'll
No.
never make you
Nope.
better at composition. They're never going to make you choose what lens or what time of day you shot. I mean,
Yep.
those are the things that really make an
Yes,
image.
those are what actually make a
preset
good
just
image.
gives you quote the sauce a little bit
Yeah.
faster.
Yes.
That's it.
A preset is not going to take a bad image and make it a good one.
No, absolutely
Never.
not. And I
Never
will
will.
say, get some presets, throw them on an
Yeah.
image, and see if you can
Yeah.
break them down.
Yeah.
Just do a little before and after, and
Yep.
go through each panel and say, okay, what is this preset doing?
Yeah.
So that you know
And one of
what's going on.
one of the best pieces of advice I feel like I ever got about presets was actually from one of my favorite photographers ever, Boris Mankins.
Mhm.
He told me, I was asking him, like, oh, what do you think about presets? What do you do with presets? And he said one of his favorite things to do with presets is, get a batch of images into Lightroom, apply a preset to, your first image, whatever, and then copy the settings, but only copy certain settings at a time. So only copy, your HSL and paste that onto an image and see what it's doing. Only copy, your exposure, contrast, saturation, all that stuff. Copy that and paste it on,
that's a good take.
and just go through. And he said he'll even combine presets.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's diverging off of the
Sure,
question. You still 100% can stand out without presets because, again, at the end of the day, what makes a good image is, your composition, the light it was shot in, your eye, the gear that was used, those things. The preset
Absolutely.
is just the finishing sauce.
Yeah, great question. So thank you for whoever submitted that. We know who it is. We try to respect people's privacy and not say. But thank you for submitting that question. So we're gonna wrap this up for you guys, but we're gonna take one more question. So I think Mike has it. What you got, Mike?
Yeah. So this is another loaded question.
I love it.
But
Let's go.
what is the best way to get started as a beginner? The
Mm.
$1 million question.
So Mike, why don't you kick us off there? As being the younger of the two, I'd love to hear somebody's thoughts who isn't that far removed
Yeah.
from the beginner phase. So when did
Yeah.
you start? Like, when did you
Ooh.
officially start taking pictures that you would, if somebody asked and you have to tell them? Like for me, it's probably 2010. I'd say that's when I started.
Like if somebody says, "What do you do?" and you say, "I'm a photographer."
yeah,
that kind of thing.
how long you been doing it? Well, I've been doing, like when would you say you
So-
started?
I had my first DSLR in 2017.
Okay.
I would say late 2018 was when I started, I feel like, identifying as like, I shoot photos.
So, and I would say in the couple of years that we have worked together, I've seen your progression just skyrocket.
Yeah, I mean,
it's
you were there from the beginning.
yeah, and that's kind of why I wanted to ask, and I didn't mean anything negative by
Sure.
you're not that far removed, but the truth
Yeah.
is you're really not that far removed from a technical
No.
beginner, if you will. So
No, I mean, 2018, I had never hit record on a video. I've never switched my camera to video mode before.
Right.
Like I was shooting in all aperture priority, had not made the jump to manual. Like that was not 3 years ago. I mean, that was not long ago at all.
So, Mike, if you could, let's maybe boil this down because it is such a loaded question. Why don't we narrow it down to 3 things that somebody can really apply? Like, if you're a beginner and you really want to get started, what would you say, are the 3 biggest areas that you should really invest your time?
1, find someone who is further down the road than you are. That I will say was probably the biggest help to me, which was was finding someone who has been there, done that, who is further down the road than I was. Like they've started.
Yeah, I wish I had taken that. I sort of tried and kind of got rejected a little bit in the Charleston wedding world. It's pretty closed circle. I should have pushed on some avenues outside of that. But to your point, I wish that I had somebody, even 2 years down the road, or even one, to be honest, a few months, just somebody who has that experience to say, no. Yeah. Tweak this, do that.
Sure.
So
when I started, I found James, who was doing it professionally full time. That was what he was doing. And then I had another friend, Adam, who was doing it as a hobbyist. Like he had a 60D, he had prime lenses, like he had good gear, but it was a hobby. So I feel like that was actually a really good balance. Like somebody who was doing it every single day, who was professional, and one person who just is like knows enough So like I feel like had a good bridge of knowledge. Like I had somebody who could explain everything, break it all the way down, every technicality, and somebody who was just like, I know how to shoot in aperture priority mode. And I'm like, amazing. So finding somebody further down the road is I would say do that before you buy any gear. Like YouTube, internet is great, but it cannot replace finding somebody who you can go have a cup of coffee with and talk through all the things.
Yeah, and I would say don't be afraid of on that note. Don't be afraid to have your work critiqued.
Yeah,
if you will,
be very open to constructive
obviously
criticism.
Find somebody who who can do it properly. Like there's one thing of bashing and critique; those are very different things. Like find somebody who can actually give you some helpful information. Yeah. And I also wouldn't go to like a fine art photographer and say, "Can you critique my wedding thing?" Like it's just. They're too far removed, right? So, have a little bit of sense.
Find somebody whose work you like. Like, find somebody not just somebody who like you think will be good. Find somebody who like, oh yeah, like I like the way they shoot. Like I want them to give me advice. Like find somebody whose work that you like.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're happy to field any questions or take a look at stuff with you. So don't be afraid to ask us some questions as well. So I'm going to kind of boil that down to a mentor. Get a photography mentor, if you will, who can really help you. Yeah, and can really help you kind of accelerate in ways that you just couldn't do without the time. Obviously, you should put in your own time, but it's so much faster to be able to just bring something to somebody and say, "Can you help me here?"
Yeah. And what he just said, put in your own time. It's just like learning an instrument. Like, don't just, when you go meet with your mentor, don't just think about it then, like, and only practice then. But like in your own time, like you just soak in YouTube videos, soak in Creative Live, masterclass, whatever.
You should be meeting with your mentor with results in hand.
Yes, like absorbing content all the time.
Yeah.
When I was getting into it, I mean, that is all I thought about, all I watched. That was it. Like I was all in. That was it. So yeah, but the first thing I would do, find a good mentor. That's the summary of all that. Find a good mentor, someone further down the road.
What about number 2?
Yeah. So the second one I would say is, don't blow all your money on gear. It is one, you don't really know enough to buy what you probably really need. So don't just go throwing money at the problem because it's probably not going to get you what you need and be disappointed. I would just say find a reasonable budget that is totally different for every single person. Don't be afraid to buy an older camera. Anything 2016 and on is probably overkill for anything that you're going to do.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So don't be afraid just to go on eBay and, make sure it's in good condition, the whole thing. But, don't be afraid to buy older gear. And I will say, even though you may not be spending a lot of money, think about how long you can shoot with it. There is a difference between, we're not going to go into it now, but crop sensors and full frame. And even when you're buying lenses, there's a difference between prime and zoom. So, try to be conscious of gear that's still going to be good 2 or 3 years from now. I did not really do that very well at first, but I kind of just was lucky and stumbled into some good gear. But I will say, try to think about that, what's going to be good a few years from now.
And I would say, if you want any specifics, most camera manufacturers now, it's really hard to go wrong.
They're all producing good stuff.
It's kind of like Mac, PC, Coke, Pepsi. Like once you're inside of a platform, cost wise, it's just better to stay in there
100%.
To an extent, right? I've just been a long time Canon person. That's just what I started with.
And because you were Canon, like I was Canon.
Sure.
I
have no problem with Nikon, Sony. I actually would love to switch to a Sony for certain reasons. That said, I don't think the type of camera matters, but I would say if you can, get one that you can change the lenses on.
Yes. Try to, I would say, yes, that's a good point. If you're trying to get into professional photography or, take better images, DSLR is the move. Don't, point and shoots are good, but
DSLR, mirrorless, DSLR, whatever. Just if you can swap the lens on it, do that. And I will say from a budget standpoint, one thing that wasn't really around when I started was a lot of rental platforms.
Yeah,
there's companies like borrowlenses.com, Lens Rentals, who I use. You could try just about whatever you want. Yeah, and that's one of the coolest things about where we kind of are now. As technology gets better, it also gets cheaper. And, everybody rides that hype. Oh, the new model's out. So the used market is flooded with great cameras at good prices.
Yeah.
So, I would start there. Most reputable sources, if you don't like Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or eBay, go to an actual reputable vendor like B&H Photo. They have a used department.
Yep. Adorama.
They have a great used department.
Yep. Even lens rentals.
K&H. Yeah. They have some great stuff. Or KEH. Yep. So there's it'd be really difficult for you not to find something a few years old that can get you going.
Yeah.
I would say if you had to put $1 to it, if you've got 1,000, that opens up your options a ton.
Yeah.
But you can really get in for $300.
I was going to say for 1,000, you could probably get something somewhat newer with an entry-level lens that is for a beginner, it's amazing. And even for a lot of people, I mean, you can ride that for a while.
Oh, absolutely. I think I had my original 50D. I used that body for 2 years.
Yeah.
And only got rid of it, but just because it didn't have the low light that I needed. And I wanted to move to full frame, and we'll go down that rabbit hole later. But yeah, from a gear standpoint, to Mike's point, don't think that you have to have thousands and thousands of dollars just to start, because that's the thing is the other thing about just starting is you're going to figure out not only what style you like, but what lenses and other equipment you need to do that style.
Sure.
And that's really going to determine your monetary spend. Some people only need one lens and one body, and they can do their entire style.
Yeah.
If you end up wanting to be a headshot photographer, you
Yeah.
can get one lens, one body, and then you just invest in lighting.
Yeah.
So it really depends on what you end up gravitating towards, but get a body that lets you put different lenses on it and just start there. You decide which
100%.
one, but if you can take the lens off and put a different one on, that's where I would lean. The whole gear thing, that's always going to be a rabbit hole. We're happy to answer any questions. So hit us up on Instagram if you want to dive in a little bit further. So Mentor 1, gear number 2, and then what would you say would be number 3?
Just shooting in proper light. I feel like, that's a big part of it. Don't overthink it when you first, start out. Like, just find, a good, and if it's in your house, like find, your dining room that has a bunch of windows, like, shoot, if you're shooting products, like, or you're shooting food photography, just find an area with good light. If you're shooting a portrait, try to shoot it towards sunset or sunrise. Don't just shoot in the settings that just make it the easiest, just so you can kind of, get started and see some good results from, right from the start. And that'll kind of help you feel more inspired to keep doing it.
Yeah. And the lighting thing's kind of twofold, right? You've got the technical side of how does light play into what your equipment can do. But the other thing is, if you learn different lighting scenarios, right? To your point, where do I need to put my people or my subject at sunset, at sunrise, midday, if I'm in a room and there's window light coming in from the side, what angle do I need to be? Like, if you learn the lighting side of things and how that just affects an image, I think I would definitely start there as a beginner. Is just say, okay, I've got my camera, I've got my lens, I've talked with my mentor. Now I just need to learn, how does the light shape everything that my camera actually sees?
And I feel like, kind of something else that plays into, all of these categories, but it's just shoot, just go shoot, just, like try to shoot in, in good lighting situations. But honestly, at the end of the day, just the best way you're going to learn. And then the only way to get better is just to just get your reps and just shoot as often as you can.
How much do you think that you shot when you had your body and your kit lens, and obviously being young and little responsibilities, right? To take it into your own personal situation. But
I was in a situation, again, I was young, no responsibility. I was in a situation with my job too. I mean, I was shooting, I would say I shot pretty much every day about whatever I wanted to. And so, I was shooting.
How many hours do you think you put in a day?
Hours? I would say about 4 hours. I would say at the end of the day, it was some kind of shooting.
And I think that that's probably one of the biggest contributing factors to how fast you were able to progress and not even just like learning, but just the quality of images that you take. I mean, from the stuff you started with to the stuff now, like now you're in this refinement period, right? Where as a beginner, you're like, I'm just going to shoot and see what happens. And for me, I think that I made a conscious effort I was a little different. I had a job and some milder responsibilities than now, but I made a conscious effort to shoot at least 1 hour per day.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean like every second of every hour you're just pressing the shutter button. Like just go outside for 1 hour and do it at different times of the day, but that for me was huge of just, saying, okay, at some point I'm not going to be a beginner anymore, but I still have so much to learn.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying I'd add that on as like the fourth point is just shooting. Honestly, that kind of overrides it all. Like, I mean, find the mentor, but I mean, fair. Just whatever gear you have, I would say the mentor is huge. It's
so forget everything we said. Just get something. And
but definitely just shooting all the time, and then editing as well. I mean, that's obviously like shoot, but then just pull it onto your computer and see what it looks like. See, experiment with colors.
And I would say, to that point, if you don't have if you're not in a position to spend money on an editor, like most computers come with something. I don't know what Windows version
for that
is.
matter, your phone.
Oh,
comes
absolutely.
With most,
Yeah, that's a great point too. Just put them on your phone, and a lot of times you can really dial it in camera. Your camera also has color and saturation settings, and you can make your own profile and go do a bunch of back and forth and figure out what you like in camera. You don't have to shoot in RAW. JPEG is just fine in certain situations. So, I probably wouldn't even disregard JPEG and RAW for now. We'll go down that later.
We cut that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so again, those being the 4 big points. Find a mentor. Don't blow your budget on gear. Try to shoot in ideal lighting conditions just so you can see those results, and then just shoot all the time.
Absolutely.
I think that's what sums it all up.
Well, those are some really great questions. I want to thank everybody who submitted and answered the call there. If you have any other questions, be sure to follow us on our Instagram at Good Grain Podcast. We post polls there somewhat regularly and love these types of episodes where we get to kind of answer your questions. And be sure to follow us there as well so that you know when and be sure to follow us there as well so you know when all the latest episodes air. So again, thanks for anybody who listened. I'm James. Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
And
we'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time.